Our girl wakes up in a cave, feeling water dripping from the ceiling. She reaches up and touches her face, slowly opening her eyes. As she looks around, she notices the air is really hot. She takes in her surroundings and realizes she's still alive. Confusion fills her mind, and she wonders where she is. Her eyes wander, and she spots a skull lying on the ground. Instinctively, she covers her mouth with her hand, fear rushing through her. Then, memories start flooding back. She remembers she's in the dragon's cave. Her heart races as she remembers everything that happened to bring her here. She thinks of Marcellus Selen, the divergent king, and Princess Tina. Shina, the princess, had fled the country, and she was supposed to be executed. But then, the new queen, who's also her older sister, shows mercy. To keep the peace in the kingdom of Posital, the queen convinces her younger sister to offer herself to the dragon in Black Rock Cave. She can still hear the ceremony in her mind. The sacrificial bread had been placed, and they made a plea to the dragon to protect Posital. She also remembers Princess Shina, trapped in a container, crying. Her older sister cries too, while Ansel, someone who is there, comforts her and tells her not to be scared. Even though she's reassured, she can't help but feel that she hasn't betrayed her country. Back in the cave, she wipes away the tears from her face. She realizes she's still alive. The dragon hasn't come back yet, so she's safe for now, but it won't be for long. Staying here any longer is dangerous. This place is full of sacrifices, and she has to leave. She decides to find somewhere safe to hide. As she walks, she sees something from a distance. She notices a breeze and thinks there might be a way out. But the cave is dark, and it's hard to see. She moves closer and finds a man lying on the ground, badly hurt. She's shocked and wonders who he is. His injuries look serious, and she realizes he's barely alive. His heartbeat is so weak. He's in worse shape than she is. She pauses, unsure of what to do. Should she help him or leave him? She doesn't know. She sits beside him, looking up and thinking about what to do. She realizes she might not be able to get out of the cave alone, but she's determined to help him, so she decides to do her best to save him. Even though she's exhausted, she gathers what little strength she has left and starts to use the holy healing spell. She presses her hands together and focuses as she touches his head. That's when she sees the bone spike sticking out of his body. It's the cause of his injury. Carefully, she pulls it out and throws it aside. Then she focuses on stopping the bleeding and healing the wound. It's hard, but she manages to close the wound, even though she's so tired. The man starts to stir and opens his eyes. She feels a wave of relief, thinking he's awake now. But before she can react, his eyes begin to glow. Suddenly, without warning, he shoves her away and bites her neck. The sharp pain makes her cry out, telling him it hurts. But then, just as suddenly, he falls back against her and passes out. She's confused, not understanding why he's unconscious again. She gently pushes him aside, so he can lie down more comfortably. She touches his chest and feels his heartbeat. It's stronger now, and she feels relieved, knowing she has succeeded in helping him. She quietly says to herself that it's good because she's not alone in the cave anymore. Feeling drained and weak, she lies down next to him and holds her stomach. But soon after, she starts vomiting blood. The pain gets worse and suddenly, a dragon tattoo appears on her shoulder. It's a beautiful, detailed design that glows as it marks her skin. Weak and overwhelmed by everything, she can't move anymore. She stays there, unable to do anything else. The man beside her, the one who had bitten her, suddenly wakes up. He sits up and sees her lying nearby. At first, he can't believe it, she's human. He tries to use his power, but nothing happens. He realizes his magic doesn't work. He's still alive, but is stuck in a human form. He looks at her again, thinking about what she did earlier. Could this fragile little human really have saved him? As she lies there, she starts mumbling in her sleep. Her voice is soft, but he can hear her clearly saying something about feeling cold. He's confused. Was her condition from an illness, or did saving him do this to her? Unsure of what to do, he tries to cast a spell to help her, but it fails. He realizes that he has no power left, not even enough to heal himself. She keeps murmuring quietly, talking about the pain she's feeling and how cold it is. He watches her, frustrated by how weak and delicate humans seem compared to what he's used to. Then he notices the dragon symbol on her shoulder, marking her skin. With the last bit of energy he has left, he lights a small flame with his fingers. The fire flickers in the dark cave, and he sees how bad his situation is. He thinks to himself that it's pathetic, having to rely on someone so fragile to stay alive. But as he looks at her, he can't deny that the mark on her shoulder means something. He feels a strange responsibility for her now, like she belongs to him. In the cave, he manages to start a fire, carefully stacking firewood beside them to keep it burning. He lies down next to her and watches her sleep, thinking about everything that's happened. His flames may not be what they once were, but they still have some use. He looks up at the top of the cave, wondering if he will ever be able to fly freely in the sky again. Slowly, he closes his eyes, lost in thought, thinking about what's next for both of them. She suddenly wakes up, snapping out of her sleep. Her hand instinctively moves to his chest, where the injury had been. She sits up weakly, rubbing her face, trying to sort through her thoughts. She remembers where she is and mutters to herself about being in the dragon's cave. She recalls how she saved the man beside her. Then she complains about the strange tribe that sacrifices people, even without giving them clothes. With shaky hands, she uses her cape to cover him up. He opens his eyes, and she freezes in shock. She asks if he was also sacrificed to the dragons, mentioning how badly hurt he was the day before. He touches his head, trying to remember the human language he once knew. As he focuses, his mind begins to adjust to the language again. Sitting on the ground with her legs folded, she holds her knees and asks him his name and where he's from, what kingdom or tribe he comes from. He stands up, removes the cape she gave him, and holds it in his hand. He introduces himself, saying his name is Arligalak, then adds a quick farewell. She responds with her own name, Shina, but she thinks to herself that she shouldn't use her real name so casually. She repeats his name slowly, carefully, and then mentions finding clues that might help them plan. As she moves forward, holding his hand, she talks about the sacrifices made to the dragons, food, silk, and other offerings. He stands behind her with his arms folded, silently thinking about how humans keep throwing things into his cave. He wonders what's wrong with them. She opens a container and mentions that she's going to find something for him to wear. While she searches through it, he notices the mark on her shoulder and raises his hand, wanting to touch it. He realizes that the mark means she's also been chosen as a sacrifice for him. Just as he's about to touch her, she quickly turns around and hands him a shirt, telling him it should fit. He takes the shirt and asks if he really has to wear it. She insists, reminding him that she saved his life and that they can't stay in the cave. She urges him to change quickly, warning him that staying there is dangerous. He asks what kind of danger she's talking about, and she explains that the dragon could return at any moment. While she sits down, he moves behind a rock to change into the clothes she gave him. As he gets dressed, he thinks about the dragon, wondering how long he'll have to stay in the cave. He also wonders if humans think of him as an evil being. Once he's dressed, he asks if he put the clothes on right. She turns to look at him, and when their eyes meet, he thinks about how unreasonable she seems. But he also realizes that she's the one who saved him from the dragon she spoke about with fear. In the damp cave, water keeps dripping steadily from the crystal above. He stretches his hand out, catching a drop as it falls. Moving closer, he sees her lying weakly. She whispers, saying she's thirsty. Gently, he pours the water from his palm into her mouth, trying to help ease her pain. He reminds her of their plan to escape, but then admits that her illness has slowed them down. With a sigh, he reflects on how fragile humans can be. Then, he suddenly stops and chuckles, realizing that he, too, is now one of them. He speaks softly again, telling her that he owes his life to her, just like she owes hers to him. He encourages her to keep remembering her dreams. As she rests in his arms, she starts muttering in her sleep. Her voice calls out a name, Ansel. He frowns, wondering who this Ansel could be. At the same time, in her dream, she finds herself back in the past, chasing after a boy. She runs after him, asking him to wait. He stops and turns to look at her, asking why they are there. Before they can say more, another voice calls out to them. It's Master Varenzel, who says they need to continue their lesson on holy healing. The boy responds excitedly, ready to learn more. The dream changes, and now she and the boy are sitting by a window. She asks him if he wants to become a high priest when he grows up. He says yes, and as they sit there, their hands are holding each other. She declares that one day she'll be queen and asks him to protect the kingdom with her. He agrees, promising that they'll protect it together. Suddenly, the dream takes a darker turn. She feels a sharp pain in her head, and she wakes up with a start. She looks around and sees her mentor lying on the ground. A sword is stuck in his chest, and there's blood everywhere. Shocked, she covers her mouth, wondering how this could have happened. She tries to heal him, but nothing works. Panic rises in her chest as she realizes that something dark has affected him, and it's blocking her holy healing magic. Her mind is spinning with confusion as she remembers wanting to ask her mentor about her past. But as soon as she entered the sanctuary, something had thrown her off. While she kneels beside him, soldiers and others start to arrive, including her older sister. One of the soldiers speaks to her, calling her a princess and asking what happened. He points to her teacher and accuses her of killing him. She tries to explain herself, asking why he would think she or her mentor would do such a thing. Marcellus, someone else in the group, suggests that her troubled past might have caused her to act this way, but she didn't need to go this far. Tears fill her eyes as she denies the accusation, insisting that she only wanted to talk to her mentor, and had invited her friend, Ansel, to support her. Ansel, however, avoids her gaze and holds her sister close, making excuses for why he wasn't there during the whole incident. The feeling of betrayal stings, and her thoughts turn bitter. Ever since she found out the truth about her identity, everything has been falling apart. The man speaking to her says, she's lost her mind and orders her to be subdued. That's when it hits her. It's all a setup. A trap she walked right into without realizing it. Her accuser continues, accusing her of using dark magic and committing treason. He demands her punishment by the purifying flames of a dragon and orders her to be thrown into the black rock cave. Back in reality, she stirs in his arms, muttering things that don't make sense. Her lips form the words, evil dragon, and he looks at her curiously. She speaks again, this time saying, another evil dragon. His expression changes as he listens to her last words, where she challenges him, warning him that if he keeps calling her that, she'll show him just how evil she can truly be. As she lies there, he looks down at her and speaks softly, wondering why she calls him an evil dragon. He says he hasn't done anything bad to humans. But then, he stops for a moment, thinking to himself that maybe he's done a little wrong. He remembers when he was a dragon and burned down human buildings. He pushes the thought away, telling himself he hasn't broken any ancient human laws. While holding her, he says he hasn't even done anything to her yet. He starts thinking again, about how he used to enjoy playing in human lands. Maybe, he wonders, he might have made a mistake. As he gets lost in his thoughts, an old memory comes back to him. A long time ago, when he was still a dragon, someone rushed to him, urgently telling him that his father was dying. He quickly returned to Dragon Island, but by the time he got there, his father had already passed away. He feels a deep regret, wishing he could have seen his father one last time. He remembers how his father's body had started to show signs of decay a while ago. He had asked his uncle about it, and his uncle told him not to worry, that it wasn't serious. Then, out of nowhere, his uncle and a group of other dragons showed up. His uncle said that since he liked human lands so much, maybe he should just become a human forever. Before he could react, they all worked together to transform him into a human. That was when he felt the sharp pain of a dragon's tooth piercing his chest, sealing the change. He suddenly opens his eyes and realizes it was all just a dream. She asks if he's okay, saying he looks like he's trapped in a nightmare. She stands up and takes his hand. He touches his head and says he's fine, warning her not to waste her strength on him, because she might get sick again. She reassures him, saying she's not that weak, but then she shows concern, saying they can't heal slowly in such a dangerous place. She reminds him about the threat of the dragon's return, saying they'll all die if they stay here. She talks about what happened to the sacrifices in the large cave and insists they need to find a way out, fast. She places her hand on his shoulder and tells him she wants to go home. When he hears this, he thinks about home too, and silently promises himself he'll reclaim what's his. He takes her hand and says they need to find a way out. She hesitates for a moment and asks how he knows what to do. He explains that while she was sleeping, he scouted ahead to find the way out. She looks surprised, but she accepts his explanation, though he warns her that the path might be tough. She comments on how rough it might be as they start moving. She uses her light to brighten the way while holding onto him with her other hand. He comments that since she's so afraid of dragons, he doesn't mind staying human for a while. As they walk, they come to a spot where they need to jump across. He counts down, holding her hand. When the moment comes, they jump together. Moving further, they reach another gap, but this one is much wider. She hesitates and says it's too far. Without a second thought, he picks her up in his arms and tells her to hold on tight if she's scared. She asks what he's doing, but before she can say anything else, he leaps across the gap with her. She cries out in surprise as they land on the other side. He calmly replies that, of course, he's just trying to find a way out. As they jump, he holds her tightly in his arms. They land on a spot, but the surface cracks beneath them and starts to crumble. Without hesitation, he jumps again, landing on another surface. As he gets ready to leap once more, she, still in his arms, warns him to be careful. He reassures her to hold on tight, as he prepares for the next jump. She continues shouting in fear as he leaps up again, finally landing on a safe, stable surface. Sweat drips down his face, and he thinks about how weak he feels in his human form. The exhaustion hits him hard, something he hadn't really noticed before. But as she looks up at him, still in his arms, she's amazed by his strength. She wonders how someone so powerful could have been sacrificed to a dragon and suffered such terrible injuries. He gently sets her down, letting her stand on her own. He asks if she's scared and if she can still walk. She tells him she can, thanking him for helping her. He reminds her of his promise to get her out, and tells her not to waste time. He takes her hand and starts leading the way. She follows closely behind, thinking about how lucky she is to have saved him. She admits to herself that she wouldn't have been able to escape the cave on her own. But once they are outside, she plans to rely on herself. When they finally make it out of the cave, the bright sunlight makes her squint a little. She feels a huge wave of relief and hugs him tightly, happy they've escaped. Watching her, he thinks their journey wasn't really that hard. She thanks him from the bottom of her heart for all the help he's given her. After stepping back, she clasps her hands together and asks if he's also going home. He turns the question back on her, asking where she plans to go. She thinks about the nearest safe place, the Highland Barracks, which is guarded by General Sedian, someone who's loyal to her. Deciding this is her best bet, she tells him she wants to go southwest, toward her home. He agrees to go the same way. Surprised, she hesitates, but then follows as he takes her hand, saying they should start heading out. As they walk, she thinks about his injuries and wonders if he can go back to where he's from. She figures that might mean they'll be together for a while. After walking for some time, she stops him and points out that her destination is far away, and walking is too slow. She spots some horses nearby and suggests they use them, mentioning that she can train them. He looks at the animals, remembering how he used to think of them as food. She approaches one of the horses carefully, holding out a piece of fruit. The horse takes the fruit and starts eating it, and she gently pats its face, talking to it softly. But suddenly, another horse rushes toward her, as if it might knock her over. He acts quickly, grabbing her and pulling her out of the way. The two horses start fighting over the fruit she gave, causing a bit of chaos. He steps forward, deciding to take control. He approaches the horses and uses his natural authority, telling one of them to move away. The horse listens and runs off in the distance. He turns to her and says that the black horse has gotten away, and suggests they ride the white one since she has already calmed it down. They both get on the horse and start riding again, picking up the pace on their journey. After riding for a while, they come to a spot by the river and decide to take a break. She picks up an apple, noticing how big it is, and suggests they rest for a bit and eat. While she gathers a few more apples, Ollie stands nearby with his arms crossed. He watches her but thinks to himself that he'd rather have some meat. Suddenly, something in the water catches their attention. Out of nowhere, a creature jumps out, aiming straight for Shina, who is standing near the edge of the river. Without thinking, he quickly grabs the creature with his hand, holding it tight. He asks if they can eat it, but Shina quickly explains that it's a fish monster, and it's both dangerous and poisonous. Realizing the danger, he throws the creature back into the water. He grabs an apple, takes a bite, and starts walking away. She watches him, wondering why anyone would want to eat something so scary. After their short break, they continue their journey and eventually reach the Highland camp. From where they are on the horse, they can see two guards standing by the gate. She tells him they've arrived and thinks about General Sedian, who has been stationed at the camp for a long time. She feels reassured by the loyalty of the soldiers under his command, but she reminds herself to stay cautious. She puts on a cape, covering most of her body so that only her eyes are visible. She gets off the horse and asks him to wait, while she goes up to the gate. The guards stop her and ask who she is and what she's doing. She introduces herself as Vassala Lang and asks to speak with General Sedian. The guards question her further, but before she can answer, Aligalak steps forward, which makes the guards hurry off to tell their leader. Inside, Sedian is reading when the guards bring him the message. At first, he brushes it off, saying he doesn't know anyone by that name. But when he hears it again, he stops, remembering something from the past. He recalls teaching a young Shina how to ride a horse. She had told him about her dream of entering an equestrian competition, and he had agreed to help her under the name Vassala Lang. The memory confirms his suspicions, and he quickly heads to the gate. When he arrives and sees her standing there, he is so moved that it brings tears to his eyes. He calls out to her, but she corrects him, asking him to call her Miss Shina. He takes her hand, kisses it, and agrees to her request. Standing behind her, he manages a small smile. Sedian, curious about who Aligalak is, asks about him. She tells him that they both escaped from the dragon's cave together. Sidian doesn't recognize the name, but says nothing about it. She adds that it's lucky he was there because it helped her escape. But as she speaks, she suddenly collapses. He calls her name in alarm, and Arligalak quickly catches her before she hits the ground. He explains that she's exhausted and still recovering from her injuries. Holding her gently, he looks down at her with concern. The general, realizing what's going on, apologizes for rushing things and promises to find a place for them to rest. He mentions breakfast and says they can talk more later. Just as they are about to leave, she opens her eyes a little and tells them they are safe now in the camp. Princess Shina lies on the bed, still unconscious, with Arligalak, General Sidian, and another man standing around her. The general looks at the man and asks how she's doing. The man replies that he's treated all of her external injuries, but her mental strength is very weak. Arligalak stands beside her, arms folded, staring at her. He thinks to himself about how she saved him. The man then turns to the general and suggests they might need priests and holy healing to help her recover faster. He looks at the princess and says he'll think about it. He tells the man he can leave. Arligalak, still standing by the bed, asks General Sidian why they don't call a priest to heal her. The general looks at him, thinking about how much the princess seems to trust him. He answers that he has doubts about the character of the priest, Kita, who was sent there. Without hesitation, Arligalak says that if the priest tries anything, he'll slap his neck. The general glances at him, then looks over at Dima, wondering if he's a foreigner. He wonders if the man was sent to the dragon, because he's too brutal. The general then says he'll arrange for a maid to take care of Princess Shina. Arligalak sits next to the princess, holding her hand gently. He speaks to her, asking if this is her home and saying she should have called someone to help her. He even tells her it would have been better if she had stayed in the cave with him. His thoughts drift back to when they arrived at the camp, remembering how the general had kissed the princess's hand. He starts to clean her hand carefully as he sits there, lost in thought. In General Sidian's office, he talks to the man who treated the princess earlier. He tells him that he'll leave things to the man's wife now. The man assures him everything will be fine. With his hand on his head, General Sidian thinks about how there are hardly any women at the border camp. Thankfully, Aisha, the adjutant's wife, has been helping with the border branch, so he trusts her to handle things without any issues. Meanwhile, at the farm, Dora asks Aisha if she can go with her. Aisha tells her to stop messing around. Dora complains that the place is boring, and Aisha responds that the military camp isn't a place for fun, and tells her to stay there and wait. Dora, still unhappy, says they traveled all this way, and all they got was a ranch full of cows, sheep, and horses. Back at the camp, the gate opens, and a guard calls out, letting Lady Aisha through. When the carriage stops, the door opens, and Dora steps out. She's surprised to see Aisha, and calls her name. Dora answers that she's coming with her. Aisha is a bit shocked and asks why she's there. Dora says she heard Aisha was there to take care of an injured noble lady and promises she won't cause any trouble. Aisha, not happy but willing to let her come, tells Dora to stay close and keep quiet. Dora agrees. Aisha tells one of the guards to show Dora to the ladies' room, and the guard leads the way. When they arrive, Arligalak is standing by the door, his arms folded. The guard tells Aisha she can go in, so she walks inside and calls out to Dora, telling her to hurry. Dora follows, happy that this is much better than being stuck on the ranch with cows, sheep, and horses. Inside the room, Aisha gently puts a towel on Princess Shina's face, sighs, and says, "Poor child." She dips the towel into a bowl of water again, then tells Dora to help her take off the princess's dress, so she can clean her up. Dora agrees and starts to take off the dress. As she does, she notices a dragon mark on the princess's shoulder and gasps, saying, "This is." Dora carefully sets down the princess's clothes and jewelry, just like Lady Aisha told her to. As she places them down, her mind drifts to the luxurious silk dresses, expensive jewelry, and even the crown in front of her. She looks at the princess, who is being cleaned by Aisha, and then her thoughts return to the dragon mark on the princess's shoulder. She wonders if this is the same woman who was once offered as a sacrifice to the evil dragon. She turns to Aisha and asks, "Auntie, what kind of noble lady needs you to take care of her personally? Could it be the traitor?" Aisha quickly responds, warning Dora to be careful with her words. She reminds Dora that she made a promise and to keep quiet and focus on her work. Dora nods, agreeing quietly, and goes back to her task. After the cleaning was done, Lady Aisha tells Dora that General oversees everything in the area and has his own plans, so they don't need to worry too much about it. Dora nods, understanding what she means. As they step out of the room, they notice Aligalak standing and watching them. Lady Aisha explains that after the princess was cleaned up and treated with medicine, she was feeling much better. She says she will come back in the morning to check on her again. Dora, seeing Aligalak, turns to him and introduces herself. "Hello, my name is Dora." "I also," but before she can finish, Lady Aisha calls out to her, telling her to follow. Dora quickly agrees and starts following Lady Aisha as they leave. Meanwhile, Aligalak enters the room to check on the princess. He smirks, knowing that his hearing is much sharper than the humans around him. He overhears Dora's comment about the princess being a traitor and a sacrifice. While holding the princess's hair as she lies unconscious, Aligalak talks to himself, thinking about the idea of treason and sacrifice. Even though the princess is hurt, she still managed to save him, and he can't help but admire her courage. Elsewhere, General Sidian thanks Lady Aisha for her help. She humbly replies that it was her duty to do so. They both watch the unconscious princess as General Sidian sighs heavily, saying that the princess is too much to handle. Lady Aisha, standing behind him, simply nods in agreement. What they don't realize is that a girl is standing just behind the door, quietly listening to their conversation. Lady Aisha mentions someone who has complete control in the capital, someone no one can challenge. The girl, hiding behind the door, can't help but think that these people are like usurpers who've taken over the palace they once called home. As she watches the princess, she realizes their fates are strangely similar. But she's determined that if she gets the chance, she'll fight back. Outside the princess's room, Dora walks back and forth, her mind racing. She wonders if Lady Aisha knows the princess inside is the traitor. She thinks about the princess's sentencing and how many people were unhappy with it, only to be killed by Marcellus Selin. She worries about what might happen if the princess's children are exposed. She's afraid she might be blamed too, and she definitely doesn't want to die. Just then, Lady Aisha comes out of the room and calls her name, snapping Dora out of her thoughts. Lady Aisha tells her to bring the medicine carefully, and Dora agrees before heading off to get it. As she walks, she repeats over and over to herself, "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. I don't know anything, I don't want to die." Suddenly, she bumps into the priest. The priest turns and asks why she's in such a hurry, looking at her confused. Still panicking, Dora remembers that Lady Aisha had once mentioned that a priest had been sent to inspect military discipline in the capital. She wonders if this is the same priest, and doesn't want to get involved. If the prince finds out, it wouldn't be her fault. Dora quickly runs past the priest, telling him that she was just called to help with a seriously injured noble lady and needs to get back to her duties. She hurries off, leaving the priest behind. The priest watches her leave and murmurs to himself about the noble lady in the camp. He knows that General Sidian follows Marcellus's orders on the surface, but he also knows where Sidian's true loyalty lies. He finds the whole situation interesting, as he watches Dora disappear down the hallway. The general steps away, and gives instructions to the guards outside Princess Shina's room. He tells them to watch carefully, and they reply, "Understood, General." Meanwhile, Priest Carter stands off to the side, thinking deeply. He wonders why the guards are needed if the princess is just an ordinary noble lady. But before he can think more, he sees Dora coming towards him. He reaches out to her, and with a quick motion, begins to perform a spell. Dora is startled and calls out, "Reverend Priest." The priest turns to her calmly and says that, as a priest, it's his job to heal the wounded. But, he notes, the princess's injury doesn't seem that bad. If it was serious, the general would have called him in for holy healing instead of asking her to make soup and medicine. Dora explains that the princess is badly injured and still unconscious, but she doesn't understand why the general asked her to help. The priest looks at her, waiting for more, but she just shakes her head and says she doesn't know anything. He smiles reassuringly and tells her not to be afraid. He says he knows she's a good person, and that he doesn't want her to get caught up in something dangerous, or even lose her life. He leans in closer and warns her not to get involved in things she doesn't fully understand. Back in Princess Shina's room, Aligalak is sitting next to her when she wakes up. She smiles, surprised she has slept for so long. She tells him she feels much better now, but he says she's still too weak. She touches his chest and says she'll check his injury again later. He tells her it's nothing to worry about and reassures her that he's fine. Now that she's awake, he says she should focus on taking care of herself. Dora enters the room with the medicine and sets it down on the table. As she does, she can't help but think how strange the situation is. She finds it hard to believe that this so-called noble princess is acting so familiar with a stranger. She thinks to herself that she wouldn't do that if she were in the same position. Before Dora entered the room, the priest had approached her again. He tells her that someone like her, a good person, shouldn't get mixed up in all the problems going on around them. But, he says, if she does him a small favor, he could help her out. He hands her something, and when she asks what it is, he assures her that she won't get hurt. Back in the room, Dora holds the medicine in her hand and tells Princess Shina that she's brought it for her. Shina reaches for the medicine, but Dora hesitates for a moment, holding it tightly. The princess asks if something is wrong, and Dora quickly says no. The princess then smells the medicine and remarks that it has a strange smell. Sitting up, Princess Shina thinks that people chosen by the general shouldn't cause any trouble. The general helps her drink the medicine while Dora watches closely. As Shina drinks it, Dora opens her hand, revealing an eye on her palm. Outside the room, the priest sees everything through the eye. He watches as the princess drinks the medicine and realizes it's really her. The priest then ties a message to a bird's leg and sends it flying out the window. As the bird flies off, the priest thinks about who needs to get this news. The message is meant for Marcellus Selen. Princess Shina wakes up and sees the general standing beside her. He smiles and gently kisses her hand, happy that she's awake. She reassures him, saying she's fine now. Aligalak is standing quietly by the door, watching them. The princess asks the general how things are going in the capital. His face turns serious as he answers. He tells her that Archpriest Verencel is dead, and that she was sacrificed. The loyalists to the royal family have either been killed or forced into hiding. Marcellus Selen now controls the kingdom, and his soldiers are everywhere. Meanwhile, in the capital, a messenger arrives with news. The delegation from the dwarfs has reached the port. The news is passed on to Princess Shina's older sister, Tina. Then Marcellus Selen walks out, giving orders for officials to be arranged to welcome the delegation, and for a banquet to be held that evening. The guard quickly acknowledges his orders. Marcellus thinks to himself that the druids, who have always stayed in their valley and kept to themselves, are coming now because of their old friendship with the late king. He's curious about how they will react when they see Princess Shina, who is now under his control. Back in the room, the general tells Princess Shina the latest news. He says she will attend the throne ceremony, and at the same time, her wedding to Ansel will take place. She is shocked and looks down, feeling a wave of sadness. Quietly, she says she wants to be alone, and the general agrees to leave her. He steps out of the room, but Aligalak, who has been standing by the door, stays behind. He starts to think about the name Ansel, wondering where he's heard it before. It feels familiar, like someone from a strange dream he once had. He steps into the room, and the princess, still sitting, calls out his name. She asks him about the ritual, confused about why she has been chosen to be the sacrificial bride for the evil dragon. Aligalak, a little amused, tells her that it's a ritual where young, beautiful girls are sacrificed to the dragon for protection. He looks at her, slightly puzzled, and wonders if this means they are already married. He covers his mouth, thinking to himself about how humans never bother to ask for his opinion. Meanwhile, in the palace, Mosellisellen receives a note from Priest Carter. He opens it, reading the words on the paper. As he reads, he mutters to himself and tightens his grip on the note. It's a message from the Highlands, with the priest's name mentioned. Mosellis's eyes narrow as he processes the words. He realizes that despite his efforts to kill her, Princess Shina is still alive. He squeezes the note tightly in his hand and mutters her full name, Shina Posital. He swears that this time, she won't escape. The night is quiet, with knights standing watch on a cliff. One of them points toward the distant lights, and says it's the Highland camp. Inside the camp, Dora stands by a window, looking outside. Her thoughts are all over the place, as she wonders if everything will really be okay that night. She turns away from the window and walks over to Aligalak. She tells him that General Sidian wants to talk to him about the princess's safety and urges him to go right away. Aligalak pauses for a moment, glancing at the guards standing by the door, then leaves the room. Now that the room is empty, Dora steps inside. She looks at the princess, who is still sleeping peacefully in bed. In her mind, she blames the princess for coming back and causing trouble for them. Slowly, she reaches out and places a lantern on the windowsill. As she does this, her thoughts drift back to Priest Carter's words from earlier. He had told her not to be afraid, assuring her that he only wanted to help clear her name. He had promised that he would make sure she wouldn't be harmed. He reminded her that she used to be just a farmer's daughter. If she could make a real contribution, Mosellisellen would reward her by making her a noble. He had painted a picture of a future where she, noble Miss Dora, could have anything she wanted. Shaking herself back to the present, Dora whispers to herself that she's not doing anything wrong, she's just making her contribution. Feeling determined, she picks up the princess's tiara and puts it on her own head. She looks at her reflection in the mirror and calls herself Noble Miss Dora, imagining a future where she has everything she's ever wanted. She pictures Aligalak looking at her and praising her for being the first to see the danger and ask for help. Smiling at the thought, she places her hands on her cheeks and realizes she wants him more than anything. Overcome with emotion, Dora runs out of the room, still wearing the tiara, leaving the lantern on the windowsill. Outside, the knights notice the light shining from the window and recognize the room. They quickly rush toward it, ready for action. Meanwhile, Aligalak, on his way to meet the general, suddenly stops. He wonders why the princess's safety is being talked about with someone else. He tells himself it isn't necessary, because as long as he's there, no harm can come to her. Feeling like it's a waste of time, he decides to turn around and head back to the room. When he gets to the door, he realizes something is wrong. The guards are gone. He senses movement inside and quickly rushes forward, kicking the door open. As the door swings open, his eyes immediately land on someone lying on the floor in a pool of blood. It's Dora, clutching her throat, crying out that she doesn't want to die. Nearby, a knight stands with a knife pointed at the bed where the princess is lying. The knight looks at Dora and dismisses her coldly, saying she's not the one. He then turns his attention to the princess, raising the knife to strike. Before he can do anything, Arligalak rushes forward and grabs the knight, demanding to know if he wants to die. The princess suddenly wakes up to find a knife pointed straight at her face. Her eyes go wide in fear as she realizes the danger. But before anything can happen, the man behind the attacker moves quickly. He strikes the knight, knocking him out cold. The princess's heart races as she sees the fallen knight. It's clear now that they are there to harm her. Another knight in the room shouts a command to attack everyone. The princess doesn't waste time, thinking quickly. She knows they can't just wait around to be hurt. Grabbing the candle stand next to her bed, she warns the man about the danger, but he tells her to focus on protecting herself. Without hesitation, he charges at the enemies, taking them down one by one. One of the attackers gets close to her, but just as he's about to strike, the man grabs him and stops him in his tracks. He's determined and tells the attacker that he won't let harm get anywhere near her. After the immediate danger is over, he turns to the princess and asks if she's all right. She breathes a sigh of relief and says she's fine, thanking him for saving her. She notices his hand is hurt and offers to help. He lets her hold it, but insists it's not serious, and that she shouldn't worry about it. Taking her hand gently, he leads her in another direction, explaining that the place isn't safe anymore and they need to leave. She resists, pulling her hand away. She says she can't just leave like that. She thinks about her decisions and admits that she had been too naive. All she wanted was to clear her name and go home, but she hadn't realized how her actions could hurt others. She can't bear the thought of more people losing their lives, especially those at the Highland camp. The two of them ride away on the horse, trying to put as much distance as they can between themselves and the danger they've just escaped. After a little while, the princess speaks up, saying they've probably run far enough now. He reassures her, telling her that their pursuers won't be able to catch up, no matter how hard they try. Then, he asks her where they should go next, but she doesn't have an answer. Her face falls, and tears suddenly roll down her cheeks. She leans her head against his chest and says, with a shaky voice, that she feels like she has nothing left and no place to go. He gently wipes the tears away with his finger, holding her face in his hands, not quite understanding how she can feel that way when he's still there with her. Back at the camp, someone reports to the general. They say that all the bodies they found were male, and each had a weapon on them. The only female body they found was the one on the bed, and it had a deep wound. Lady Aisha, who stands behind the general, covers her mouth with both hands as she realizes something. She starts to think about the female body and wonders where Dora might be. The general, holding the princess's tiara in his hands, shakes his head in disbelief at what has happened. The people nearby start whispering to each other. Some of them mention the noblewoman the general had been talking to, saying she must have been burned to death. Others tell them to stop talking, but the murmurs don't quiet down. Lady Aisha can't shake the feeling of unease as she thinks back to when she prepared the princess's body, even taking off her crown. Her thoughts are interrupted when a man approaches the general and offers his condolences. As the murmurs continue around her, she notices someone in the crowd and wonders if the prince is there to investigate. But before she can think more, the crowd keeps talking, mentioning Lady Aisha, and how the child had been too scared to leave home after everything that happened. Meanwhile, the prince walks away, and the buzz of conversation carries on. Elsewhere, in the royal capital palace, a bird flies in with a note. Someone at a salon reads it and smiles, satisfied to hear that the princess has burned to death. With this news, he feels sure that his plans can move forward without any obstacles. In another scene, the two of them stop to rest for a while. He tells her to sit down and calm down, gently touching an injury on her face. She winces in pain and tells him it hurts, but he sees this as a good sign. He reminds her that she's been through worse when they were in the cave, even showing courage by helping him escape from the dragon. He wonders why she seems so discouraged now. They sit together, and she admits that she feels like the road home is blocked. He reassures her, saying if one road is blocked, they will just find another way. She thinks about it for a moment, considering her options. The only place she can think of turning to is the dwarfs of Iron Ridge Mountain. But getting there won't be easy. To reach it, they would have to go through the northern kingdom of Rohan, which is friendly with Marcellus Selen. That route would put them at risk of being exposed. The other option is to go south, around Guman Forest, but that path is filled with fierce trolls, making it nearly impossible for just the two of them to make it through. She sighs, frustrated that neither path seems like a good choice. He looks deep in thought, and when she asks him what he's thinking, he points in a certain direction. She follows where he's pointing and realizes he's suggesting they go through the poison mist swamp. She quickly shakes her head, saying that the swamp is ancient and dangerous, filled with poisonous mist. No one has ever survived there, let alone passed through it. He stands behind her, thinking about what she said, but then he pulls her onto the horse. She protests, asking what he's doing, but he simply puts her on the horse and tells her they're going through the swamp. She can't believe it and asks again, but is firm and determined. As they ride toward the swamp, he tells her he's confident they can find a way through, even with the poison fog surrounding them. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time, ciao.